Oh boy, here we go again. Look, let me make this clear. I don't want to complain. I don't want to criticize. I don't want to bitch. I don't want to moan. I don't want to be negative. And I don't really feel like you always have to be with this show, because I think for what Digimon Ghost Game is, and I've said this before, it's entertaining. It's fun. You get a 22-minute adventure and you're done, and there's something to appreciate for that. There really is. The problem is people kind of hold Digimon to a higher standard than that, and I've now brought this up several times why that's an issue. So for this week, instead of criticizing, we're just going to take a minute or two, talk about what I liked about this episode, and then kind of maybe give some constructive criticism as to maybe why things aren't going as well as they could be or should be. Specifically in regards to characters, because Digimon is well known for its characters. It's what I think people really like about this franchise. Besides just, the cool marketable monsters. And to be fair, I think this show does in theory have good characters. I think Hiro is a likable lead. I think the one whose name I can never remember is fine. The only one of these kids who feels like a real character at this point to me is Ruli, because Ruli is someone who is fun, eccentric, adventurous. She gets herself into situations and then kind of has to deal with the trouble of it later. She feels more like a real kid. And to be fair, I did like in this episode the idea of her and Jellymon teaming up. That made for a fun little thing. I think the setup for this episode's kind of neat. Like, everyone's sort of trapped and it's getting colder and they've got to hurry and figure it out. And I like the resolution for this one actually made sense. It is a situation where it's a Digimon who's just trying to figure out how to live and survive in a world he and the rest of his friends do not understand. And that then naturally is going to lead to conflict with humans and human society. So that's nice. The rest of the episode is very bare bones. It's very generic. It goes exactly how you expect, following this show's formula to the letter. And more importantly, it kind of highlights a big problem with the characters, because this guy who does nothing but whine and complain and screech all the time is also a super genius who designed a fucking power plant. This is my issue. They're not Digimon characters at this point. What makes Digimon characters so good, and this is what I really want to talk about this week, is why are Digimon characters the way they are and why they work. And so when Digimon came out, we were in the middle of Pokemania. Dragon Ball was huge. Sailor Moon was huge. The formula for anime protagonists succeeding here in the West was well formulated. Keep them simple, keep them wholesome, keep them highly moral, also keep them a little dumb so that way they can learn lessons and impart that on the viewer. And the viewer will just sort of like ensoul themselves and graft themselves onto these characters so they can be going through the adventures themselves. Digimon didn't do that. Digimon focused on, for lack of a better term, people. These are not just kids who are just lost in the woods and have to learn a lesson and partner with highly marketable toys. They all, or at least most of them, have arcs. They have backstories. And that's why Digimon characters work. They're not just as simple as TK and Matt are brothers. So therefore, Matt will be overly protective of TK, and TK will be more reliant on him. It's Matt and TK are brothers whose parents are divorced, and therefore they don't live together. This puts a big strain on their relationship. Matt is not dealing with the divorce well, so therefore that affects how he deals with everyone around him, and that's what then leads their characters going forward. The first antagonist of season 2 and later member of the team, Ken, He's not just evil and crazy for the sake of evil and crazy. He's this kid who always lived in his older brother's shadow, and after his tragic passing, sort of feels like he has to live up to that ideal and standard, and just doesn't like and just can't stand the fact that that's all he is just an imitation of his brother. So that's why he then goes destructive and why he's angry and wants to hurt people. It's that misplaced desire for identity. And then you get to see how that then affects his relationships with everyone else as the series then goes. This trend continues in the Digimon franchise. Rika isn't just angry girl. She's girl who doesn't have a dad in the picture, whose relationship with her mother isn't very good because she works a lot and is a very different personality type to her. Season 4, JP is kind of the dumb, chubby one, but it's not intentional. It's an act he has to put up. He's self-conscious. He's worried people won't like him, so he feels like he has to be a little bit sillier. He feels like he needs to like try and be in your face and over the top just so that way everyone will be on his side. That's right, I referenced season 4, goddammit, in a way that was positive. I'm very proud of myself today. Season 5 continued this, and Season 5 had a very complex plot and a lot of revelations and a lot of just twists and turns. Shows like that wouldn't normally be willing to dedicate a lot of time to character, but it wasn't afraid to. It balanced everything out in a way that's pretty damn good, even by today's standards and by shows for older audiences standards. The real big first misstep was Cross Wars. Cross Wars is a show where the characters are just one-dimensional archetypes. Your protagonist is just Mr. Perfect with no real flaws. The rival's just tough. Like, the girl is just there. Yeah, that's always the problem with girls in these shows. But yeah, that was kind of our big misstep, but I thought Aptly Monsters did a real good job with character. I think our 3 main characters in that show all have very good backstories and have very well-written arcs. And that really, I thought, was what stood out about that show. Everything kind of fell off the mark when we rebooted everything with Adventure 2020. And look, I know I've criticized this show to death, and everyone has, and I've even brought up this point before, but one of the big problems with that was Digimon's attention to character writing isn't there anymore. I don't feel like the characters really have well-written arcs. I don't feel like they have well-detailed backstories. We don't learn anything about them. There's no interesting dichotomy with their relationships. I brought up Matt and TK, and, well, they don't do any of what they did in the first show. You don't deal with the way their parents have divorced and how the kids are kind of going on with it. You don't see how that then affects their relationships with everybody. All right, Matt is tough, but it doesn't feel like he's tough because of a bad home life. He just feels tough because he just needs to be the tough guy. And even though I think Ghost Game is a huge improvement, we're kind of seeing that here again. Hero doesn't really have flaws, maybe minus he doesn't talk about his problems so much. He's just kind of always knows the right thing to do, handles himself always correctly, and that's fun for a little bit, but it's starting to wear thin and feel like a problem. Same with guy whose name I don't remember. Do we know anything about him? Do I know anything about his parents? Do I know anything about what he does in his off time? Do I know why he thinks he needs to wear a fucking band-aid on his hand? It might sound like this is nitpicking, but this is why I spent half the video explaining about all those other Digimon characters. I do know about their parents. I do know about their home life. I do know about their weird quirks and how that affects everyone. We get to see how that constantly changes and affects them throughout the show and how it affects the people they hang out with and deal with. Digimon didn't succeed just because the monsters were cool or the action was fun or because it was science fiction. Digimon succeeded because we cared about these characters. And I want to care about these characters. I really do. I like them in theory. Like I said, Ruli is a lot of fun, and the other two could 100% work, but the show constantly chooses to not care about that. It's like the show is much more interested in just, like, creepy setups and, like, weird, intense action, and there's a place for all of that. But it shouldn't come at the expense of me caring about the characters. Because at the end of the day, when you look back on it, what are you going to remember? You're not going to remember every random filler episode. You'll remember one or two, but you're going to remember the people who you followed on their journey. And if they don't stand out, your show won't. So yeah, that was my thoughts on this week's episode of Digimon and some Digimon thoughts in general. Tell me what you thought about all that below. Your thoughts on this episode. If you're fine with everything, that's fine. Tell me all that below. And as always, click to like, click to subscribe, and join me next week where hopefully we'll get a little more meat on the bone.